Thank you all for coming this afternoon. Thanks to Randy and Elaine, who couldn't be here, for hosting Yuriy and I. It's a real pleasure to be able to come here and offer some music today. So I'm John Westmoreland. A lot of you already know me, probably. And the way this has come together really was I was on a trip doing some shows and traveling around in Finland, trying to kind of get in touch with some of my Finnish ancestry. And a large part of the reason I went there was because of a particular relative of mine whose name was Matti Valentin Poika Hutta. And he was better known by a moniker T-Bone Slim. And he was in the Industrial Workers of the World. He was their probably most noted columnist and a poet and a songwriter. And nobody in my family had any idea that that's who he was. My mom referred to him as Uncle Matt a few times, and she made a wonderful lithograph of him actually about 35 or 40 years ago, I guess it would probably be. So he was Finnish American, first generation American, with Finnish ancestry, born in Ashtabula, Ohio. And so I had, just through some, it's funny, Yuriy last night we played together and he was saying how some things, you can't really make them happen. And a lot of this experience of T-Bone Slim for me has been something that is there's a certain serendipity about it. Exactly, I mean, it was serendipitous to me that I found this relative who's a songwriter and, a poet, and I happen to agree with a lot of the things that he writes, and then right around the time that I discovered who he was, I also realized that my mother had been stewarding an archive of his unpublished songs and poetry and some pictures of him. There's never been a picture of him ever published. But I'll be happy to. I actually have right here later on after we're all done. If anybody's interested, I'd be happy to show you some pictures. So that was serendipitous, and I started working with the songs, and I've been doing a lot of research into his life and so on and so forth. And I just happened to reach out to some booking agents in Finland because I was frustrated with trying to get gigs in America. And I felt like, well, what's the harm in, I'll just, on a whim, reach out to some booking agents. And I told them my little story about, I have a record that I'm releasing of my songs, and also, by the way, there's this relative of mine that I recently found out about, and I'm playing his songs, and immediately I got responses back, and the response I got back from a booking agent was, oh, of course I'm interested, and said, actually, one of my good friends, Paleface, who is one of Finland's top hip-hop artists, just started a band that only plays Finnish American Industrial Workers of the World songs. Like, okay, well, that's cool. And so he put me in touch with this Paleface, and that was actually the first 2 shows I did in Finland were with this hip-hop artist, which was really fun. It was great introduction. He had the whole crowd say, "Welcome to Finland, John." And the drummer came over to me and said, he just said, "We have here the flesh and blood of T-Bone Slim." It was great. But the first night that I was in Finland, I didn't know anybody. I didn't really have anything going on, and I just went out into the center of town and brought my guitar and thought I would play some music. And I saw these 2 young women that were playing street music, and one of them was playing guitar, and one of them was playing a dan moi, which is a Vietnamese mouth harp. And naturally, I mean, if anytime I travel, I bring my dan moi with me. So I pulled out the Vietnamese mouth harp and just kind of started jamming with him for a song, and then we just briefly said hello, and then I went on my way. And the next night I came out to the same area of town and was playing the guitar just on my own, and I happened to see them both again, and they came over and introduced themselves, and one of them, the young woman whose dan moi had broken, and so she was wondering if I knew anything about fixing them, which I don't, but I just offered the one that I had because I had a few others back in North Carolina, and I'm not exactly a professional Vietnamese mouth harp player, so I felt like it was okay. But anyways, it turned out they were these wonderful Ukrainian folks, and they were traveling around. They'd been hitchhiking. They'd gone through Estonia, and they were in Finland, and I think they were. I don't remember if they actually went. They were planning to go to Norway. But anyways, one of them was Tanya, and Tanya is connected to Yuriy, and we stayed in touch and hung out while we were all in Finland, and Tanya invited me to come visit in Ukraine, where she was going back to her home, and so I took her up on that, and when I got there, she showed me this amazing instrument, the bandura, that she had made herself, and I was blown away by this instrument and the sounds. And I was thinking, why were you going around with the guitar when you have this? Like, you know? I mean, guitar is great. I love them. But anyways, she told me, she said, oh, well, I can take you to my teacher and the person who showed me how to make this instrument. And so she called Yuriy up or sent him a message, and he was kind enough to say, yeah, come on over. And so we hitchhiked out to Yuriy's hometown. It's in the Poltava region.
It's a village in the Poltava region, yeah.
Yeah. So Yuriy came and picked us up at a more main road, and we introduced each other. And she had told me that I don't remember if she told me that you were born in America or I knew that you spoke English and had spent a good amount of time in America. But so we got out and introduced ourselves, and Yuriy asked me, well, where are you from? And I guess I said yeah. So I just said the Southeast, because I was like,
I'm from the Southeast. Where in the Southeast? North Carolina. Oh, it's serious. Where in North Carolina? Pittsburgh. Been from Raleigh. It would have been too good to be true.
Yeah.
I'm from Raleigh, he's from Pittsburgh.
But didn't you say you lived a couple of years even in Chapel Hill?
I did.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty close. I mean, considering I had traveled like 3,000 miles.
Close enough.
And then find this guy who grew up, in Raleigh. Yeah, exactly. So it was wonderful. I was really grateful to Tanya for making this connection, and we spent a couple days there with Yuriy and his family, and yeah, it was a wonderful experience. And as it turned out, Yuriy told me he was going back to the U.S. right around the time that he was like, well, I'm going to be flying back to North Carolina. It was within a couple days of when I was flying back, actually, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
To do this tour that he's been on for
3 months.
3 months now. 3 months, all over the place. So we've stayed in touch, and I wanted to try and set up a show or two for us while he came back, when he came back to his home in America, home base in America, before he goes back to his home in Ukraine. So that's how this kind of coalesced. And I'll just let Yuriy speak to what, the tradition that he's embodying and that he's reviving, and the instruments that he has, and then we'll get into some music, and I'll share some of the T-Bone Slim music, and we'll do some collaboration as well. Yeah.
Yes. Incredible history, right? Incredible, serendipity, really. If you can imagine, just being from the same part of the world, but meeting in the other side of the world, that's incredible. But I noticed that John doesn't just play the guitar, he played with nylon strings. Right? This is a very important thing. Most people say, nylons, they're like sissy, it's like,
strum along.
You gotta have the rhythm, you gotta have the percussion to drive. But, my instruments, they were all made for gut strings. And here's this American who plays American repertoire, but with, classical guitar, kind of nylon strings. And the most important part of all of this is that he plays repertoire, this Fat Bone Slim?
T-Bone Slim.
T-Bone Slim. That it's on the same wavelength as similar people in Ukraine who played these instruments, the kobzars. The kobzars, they're in the same type of, they played protest songs, the song about the truth, right? It was all moralistic, it was about justice, it's about even caste justice, that was a part of it. And I'm used to having interesting acquaintances, right? Serious people. Only serious people come all the way to Krychkivka, this little village. And John was one of them. But John's interest to actually play the kobza, or make or play.
Yeah.
This is a project of mine, basically teaching people, mostly Ukrainians, not from the village, mostly from the big cities, Kharkiv, Kiev, Lviv. But I've always also had the pleasure of having students of non-Ukrainian origin. Japanese, Shuichi Sakuma came to make a modern instrument. But usually people from the diaspora, those people who are from abroad. It absolutely makes sense that John would also have an opportunity to spend several months in the Ukrainian village making these old-time Ukrainian instruments, but then to use them for whatever music, right? Modern, maybe his own songs, maybe something similar to T-Bone Slim.
Yep.
And that's that's what I do. So this is a wonderful thing that, honestly, there's some manager somewhere who makes these things happen, right? People say, well, you're not a good marketer, you're not a good businessman. I don't have to be, right? My costs are covered, my career is covered, everything's fine. I just have to do the right thing, and what I can't do, those things, they're resources. Like John, I couldn't make this concert here, but look, what an excellent opportunity to meet people in my backyard in Durham. And yesterday's performance with Jelly on the koro, we had 8 instruments, mostly with nylon strings, and in Jelly's tradition, similar thing, but in Africa. And these things, honestly, you can't really plan them. You just have to go with them and understand that we're going in the right direction. Yeah. So, and thank you, John and Randy and everybody who came. There's even some friends from Carnegie.
Well,
Pittsburgh.
yeah, that's my son's from Carnegie, but we live here in Cary. So.
Okay. One of the first times I actually, because I lived in Raleigh most of my life, 21 years, I didn't live in the diaspora, right? We have these ghettos, kind of in New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and there was a proposition to go meet, to study bandura. At the time I played the piano, I played guitar, but my aunt, Oksana Mashinsky, said, go to Emlenton, find Julian Katasti. And who did I meet? Boris Vovchuk, your son. And he was with his guitar. He was playing Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I had my guitar. I was playing Led Zeppelin. And then last several months ago, I was in Carnegie. He made a concert for the Ukrainian community there, and he tells his dad maybe I'll be in Durham. So incredible world, very small world, very good world, a good part of the world. So thanks to everybody for coming and taking part.
Thank you.
Should we start with, why don't we start with your instruments?
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any particular etiquette about filming or sharing?
Yes,
things
there's
on
this
Facebook
etiquette.
and stuff?
Film all you can, get the word out, propagate. And if you have or in Facebook or know somebody, use Facebook to the positive things which we can use it, right? Bad things which that somebody might exploit us through Facebook, that's their sins, right? They'll pay for the sins. We have to be careful, but let's use it to our advantage. It's a good system in general. I have lots to say. Here's the thing. My presentations, I don't call them concerts. They're not concerts. They're visits, really. But what happens in these Kobzar visits, it's basically education. There's a lot of history, a lot of experience that's tied into this. When I first witnessed my first teachers, Julian Katasti, Yarko Antonevich, Taras Kompanichenko, these guys during their concerts, they would talk and talk and talk, right? Because the songs themselves have their own message, but I always so valued the spoken word things that were said. And some people hate it. They said, oh, I hate when he talks. Not me. Why doesn't this play? But, I'm sorry, that's what we do. Right? Spoken word is part of it. And I can talk for hours, and I'll try not to, because I want to play some music too and want you to hear the instruments. The instruments are part of it. But basically, to start playing and make a long story shorter, I have three instruments: the kobza, the Ukrainian kobza, the Ukrainian torban, and Ukrainian bandura. These are three similar instruments. They're kind of like harp guitars. The bandura is like a harp bass guitar, right? You have the bass on the frets. The kobza is kind of like a Ukrainian oud with treble strings. They all have treble strings. It was a Ukrainian thing for several hundred years. And the Ukrainian torban, which is really a Baroque lute, but the Ukrainian version, which they made a super instrument of the Baroque even better by adding treble strings. So very interesting instruments, but instruments that the world does not know. Here's what's even more interesting, right? They look great, they sound interesting, but because the empire at the time, and that empire still exists, they basically banned all knowledge of the instruments, right? They killed the players. Nobody dared make one, play one, or have anything to do with them. So it's interesting and wonderful to be able to present the Ukraine that I love through the music that I love and the work that I love. So these instruments, finally, after 100 years, we're kind of reviving the tradition of playing these instruments. And basically, me being here in the States, I didn't come as a guest or come home, even though my family's all in Raleigh pretty much, except for my own family, new family, which is in Ukraine. Basically, I'm here on professional practice, right? I've been researching these traditions, playing these three instruments, for the past 20 plus years. But now, my research is at a point where it's time to actually practice, and practice it for real, right? Not waiting on the phone when the concert organizer says, okay, come on, play like 2 tunes, come to Kiev. It's where I basically get on Facebook and I say I'm coming, like it or not. And if anybody's interested in hosting a presentation, it doesn't cost anybody anything, right? Maybe some time, right? Maybe some trust. But people like John kind of showed up all over the country. Preparation for this 3-month all-national tour where I played about 60 different communities everywhere, from Raleigh to Montreal to Seattle to San Diego and back. Preparation time was 2 weeks. I got on the plane, I got my ticket, and in 2 days I was in Raleigh. And how do these things happen? I have the best manager. You can do anything, right? He knows people like John, and when they have the idea that there's such a program, that's what they do, right? And not for money. It's not, commerciality isn't a part of it. That's a different level of activity. And things kind of work like that. It's pretty incredible. But the most incredible thing is that this old tradition, which Stalin, couldn't take, basically there's a reason that they destroyed the tradition, to keep Ukrainians as slaves, right? And that happens in any population. Russia itself was turned around to make its people complete slaves, like they are today. Look at what's going on today. It's not a secret that Russians are the most exploited people by their own dictators. So and I'm going to try not to focus on negative stuff, but it's the positive things which the negative spheres couldn't take. That's what I'll try to present more. So basically, the wonderful thing is that the new world, not just America, right, but the modern world is very interested in this old tradition. And the question was, does the modern world, the new world, need the kobzar tradition, right? Maybe it's, this is an old thing, maybe, we have the electric guitar, we have rock and roll, we have Britney Spears, right? What more do we need? But the answer is no, we very much need this traditional, this tradition, like the kobzar tradition, and to be able to take that kind of soil, right, traditional forms, to create something new, but it's still on the same wavelength with things like which John do. So that's the program. And it's not a problem with the genre, it's a problem with what the wavelength is, right? You can do it in any genre, really. In classical music, right? To have a classical pianist who knows the kobzar tradition and uses, through the great composers who also, they were on a certain wavelength. That's, I think, is a classical musician. Is Randy? I lost Randy.
I'm right here.
Right, okay. That's another part of the program. And I'm so happy to find an instrument like the torban, which we play Bach suites on the torban. Isn't it wonderful to make these wonderful Ukrainian instruments which are unknown and still play Bach? And maybe some Renaissance on the kobza. It's really a Ukrainian Renaissance loop. But again, I can talk and talk and talk, but just so I do some playing. I'll start. But I don't have a program, so I have to think, well, what do we do? Well, I do have a program, but it's a question of how to, we don't have a set program. Spontaneity is a very important part of what we do. And I'll start with this tune which I did yesterday.
Okay.
So we tried this yesterday. This is the torban. It's basically Ukrainian Baroque lute, the Ukrainian version of the Baroque lute. Basically interesting. And your wife is a harpsichord player?
Yes, that's correct.
Are you his wife?
She's not here this evening.
Okay.
It's unfortunate.
Okay. Interesting that the Baroque lute, or the lute in general in European culture, basically was kind of forgotten because a new instrument arrived on the scene, the harpsichord. And the harpsichord, it was very much easier to play polyphonic works. Because here I have to have a voice, here I have another voice, or two other voices, maybe a third, fourth of a voice. And you can play fugues, Bach fugues transcriptions. They're very difficult. I don't play them.
So the harpsichord is viewed as the oppressor of the instrument.
Right.
Tell your wife.
In Western and Europe, Central Europe, but in Eastern Europe, yes.
But just but the piano is usually viewed as the oppressor of the harpsichord.
Yes,
So
it's okay. But interesting that in Ukraine, the harpsichord wasn't a very practical instrument, right? You need like a nice place under humidity control, maybe some kind of an elite kind of some castle or something, or a manor house. So basically, in Ukraine, the lute came into existence in 1700, when in Western Europe there was lute still existed, and the Baroque lute is really kind of it had the same function. It had the function of the continuo, kind of accompaniment instrument, as well in Ukraine, or just an instrument for accompaniment song. But the Ukrainian lute went on and on and on. The harpsichord never, replaced it. And until the Bolshevik occupation of Ukraine, we had torbanists. And the players of the torban, they were usually not folk musicians, although there would have been one caste which would have played would have been Cossack generals, right? These kind of not soldiers, but they're fighters, kind of volunteer fighters on the horse. The officers, they would have played the torban, as well as the hetmans, right? The presidents, the leaders, such as Khmelnytsky, Sahaydachny, Mazeppa. These are during the Cossack period, when Ukraine actually had certain borders even. Because most Ukrainian history, the past 1,000 years, we didn't have borders, right? We were under the occupation of Poland or Turkey or Germany or Russia. And Mazeppa, musicians may know because there's a transcendental etude list
yes.
about Mazeppa, and also some Western writers such as Voltaire and others. Pushkin wrote poems about Mazeppa, and Mazeppa himself wrote about Mazeppa. And the first torbanist we credit to being the hetman himself. So this is a very educated leader, very democratic. He had a relationship with Peter the not so great. Ukrainians are not big. Well, actually, a lot of Ukrainians are very fans. Basically, after the Battle of Poltava between Peter and versus Ivan Mazeppa and Charles of Sweden, Ukraine lost the war, and basically Eastern Ukraine became part of Russia for the next 300 years. Right, the question is, well, who was Mazeppa, right? The Soviet books, they don't write that he was a hero. They write he was a traitor. He betrayed Peter. He betrayed the Slavs. He went with the Europeans. What a terrible thing. But one thing we say, listening to Mazeppa's own poetry, is that he didn't betray Ukraine. That's for sure. What does he say? Does he say, oh, those terrible Muscovites, or the terrible empire, they destroyed us? No. He says a completely different thing, right? A very spiritual thing, that had we been a close nation, right? Had we loved one another, had we loved our enemies, right? Then no foreign aggressor could have taken us over. And today, when the tanks are moving around in eastern Ukraine, and a lot of funny business going on, we have the idea that, well, how do we fight for Ukraine, right? Should I find a machine gun and go on the front and start shooting? And I've considered it. I didn't find the machine gun. I didn't really look that hard. But I have another post. It's not the Cossack tradition, but the Kobzar tradition. And the Kobzari didn't play on these. The nobility of professional musicians would have played this. But basically, Mazeppa says in his poem, and he was a torbanist, right? He played and he wrote that he can't do it himself, right? Don't rely on the president to save a country. It depends. It's the country which really makes things happen or not things. And he says that maybe at least somebody will hear my word, right? So we today can hear Mazeppa's word. And part of the tradition, part of what I'm doing with this reconstruction of old repertoire, old instruments, the Kobzari and maybe the torbanists, they would have preserved the most serious works of a nation, right? Without a border, a physical border, how can a nation exist for hundreds of years? And one idea as well, we had writers and poets and musicians, Kobzars, torbanists. So this is what we do. We can reconstruct and bring back from the dead these old instruments, these old and these writers such as Mazeppa. And if you can imagine, had Mazeppa come today, what would he say? I know what he would say. He would say the same thing. As history repeats itself, he would say, love one another, right? Get your nation together. We have a right to bear arms, right? They have nuclear weapons, but we have nuclear torbans. That's what he would say.